Oh man, sorry,
What time?
it's fairly early.
Oh, yeah, what time is it for you though? It's
Five
early.
thirty.
Sorry,
5:30 in the morning.
Christ.
Yeah, no, that was to be expected though. Time zones are bullshit.
Yeah, I was about to say it's tricky in this kind of, especially when my weekends have been really weird.
Oh man.
So I'm glad we're talking.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for agreeing to do this. I don't know if I mentioned that in the like 2 months we've been trying to get this sorted out, but it's always fun when I can finally get somebody to agree to an interview.
Cool. No, it's nice. Anyway, hopefully this will be useful and entertaining. So I'm
Yeah.
like, I've had a really hard like week. I'm running on very low levels of sleep. So I'm not. It's 5:30 for you, so it's obviously worse. But like, I expect delirium. But this should be fun.
It should be.
Die's a pretty delirious game, so we can.
Yeah. No, guys. We'll get to it in a minute. How am I sounding on your end? I don't want to be too loud or
You
something
sound
like
fine.
that.
Absolutely fine.
Excellent. Awesome. Let's go ahead and just kind of get into it. I figured we'll start with like some standard questions really quick and then kind of ease our way into die.
Cool.
Since that's kind of the meat of what I want to get into. So I guess the first one we'll go with is what got you into writing? Like just kind of in general.
Wow. It's interesting. People always ask me like, how did you get into comics? But I don't think people have ever asked me how did you get into writing, which is interesting because that's just kind of why I came in. And in my previous career, I used to be a journalist, like a critic, mainly about video games. And people ask me about when I fell in love with video game journalism, but specifically, when did you start hammering out words? Oh no, that's new. Um, so that means I haven't got a pre-prepared answer. It's kind of something like everyone did it at school. I mean, like, I always think about like these early comic, sort of quasi comics. Remember that when I don't know about in America, but like at primary school, you have those kind of you have a space to draw a picture above and like lines beneath. So you kind of draw a picture, then you draw some words. So like that's when you're like 4 or 5 or whatever. I did a lot of that. So I've always been working at images and pictures, but sort of segued quite quickly into these sort of zines and stuff like that. And I was always the kid who actually made up the games, the fantasy realms for everyone else to play in. Like as a kid, I was always quite organised. As in, okay, this paracosm, to use a technical term. Um, the story that immediately comes to mind though is I went to a Catholic school, and I must have been like 10 or so, and there was a writing competition, and everyone did, and there was a prize and everything, and I wrote a lot of. I don't know how long it was. It was about a factor of 10, the longest story, and it's just very clearly me ripping on a fighting fantasy game book called City of Thieves, which were like a big deal in the UK, and it's me kind of pretty much doing my own sort of fanfic version of this, which of course I didn't tell anybody. So I handed this in, and the teacher, who is the headmistress of the school and a nun. My favourite memory is she never gave anybody the prize, not because they were all equally as good, it's because they were all terrible. Which is my favourite. As in, like everyone got sort of a prize for contributing, but explicitly it wasn't that I can everyone a winner's prize. It's you're all insufficiently good prize.
This is the
So
consolation for showing up.
yeah, exactly. Well, you all did something, so I suppose that's a good thing. But really, all your really these are terrible stories. So I suspect that's my entrance into like being Hasbro, not just writing but also being read.
That's awesome though. Like I know a lot of people get started in schools, but usually when I am talking to people, they're like, "Oh yeah, in college, like there was this teacher who helped me out or something like that." And it's interesting that it was that early for you.
Yeah, I must say it took me a lot longer to realize I could do it as a career though. It's like I was
Yeah.
always sort of doing it, and all the way from my teenage years, all these kind of like creative projects. And as part of like researching Die, I ended up like going back to all my teenage RPG manuals. And my main kind of thought was, how did you write all this stuff? Like, how much time did you have on your hand to write this longhand? Because this is before we really had computers. Because I'm very old. But it's like I was 19 before. In fact, I was already working professionally as a journalist for like a games magazine when I realised that I could actually think of myself as somebody who could be allowed to be a writer. There's this book called England's Dreaming by John Savage about the history of punk rock. Like he was there when it was happening. So part of it is a really well-researched history, and the other part is his personal story. And there's a scene where he describes being in the work toilets and like hiding from work and basically putting together his fanzines to, I think the quote was, to let the A-bombs in my head out. And reading that, you know what I mean? Reading that and seeing, wait, that's how I feel. And if John Savage felt like that and became the writer he became, that means that's something that's allowed for you to do that as well. And that was kind of the moment when I realised that this is something I could actually properly aim for. And it was weird because I was already sort of doing it anyway. But it's like the idea that it was actually a credible career goal for a working class guy from Stafford to think about. That was the kind of that was the Damaskian moment.
I like that. That's kind of, if you don't mind me just kind of riffing for a second. That's kind of a thing that comes up with a lot of people when you talk to them about writing. It's like, oh, I'm allowed to do this. It's not one of those things. It's not one of those things that people immediately think like, oh, well, I'll just do this and hopefully something will come of it. It's like, oh, wait, yeah, I can do that, can I?
The concept of permission, I agree.
Yeah.
I quite like riffing-based interviews. I prefer conversations to sort of interviews in that way. But like the few times I've ever done stuff at schools, like in terms of like coming into a class to sort of talk, so much of what I try to do is that in times of like, it's an option. And there's not, most of the class won't care because most of the class don't really want to do it. But there's somebody in the class who kind of has a look of, oh, wait, that is a thing. That is.
Yeah, there's always that one person that's like, oh shit, right. That thing that I'm here to do right now is a thing that I could do.
It's hard. And any creative career, I mean, I don't know about schools at the moment, but when I was coming up, not any creative career is not something which teachers would ever really push people towards.
Oh yeah, totally.
They don't know how it works, and it's like there's a perfect. I remember actually when I was getting into comic writing, showing a professional comic book writer's MySpace page, and he'd actually put his wage. MySpace used to have how much you earn. You had an option you could fill in.
Oh, wow.
which is like, which even now feels such a weird thing. And it was like, this guy's a mid-level comic writer. This is a real wage. Honestly, Mum, if I can get into comics, I will not starve to death. Because I think, I did a science degree, so it's not like, I think my parents, especially up to a certain point, I think my parents always thought I was going to go back and do a more traditional career. But they definitely hit a point when it was like, oh no, he's doing fine and he's able to eat, so we can't really worry about him too much.
That's awesome though. Like it's always nice to find out that there's a decent wage to be made in the thing that you want to do. Like, because it's especially like growing up. I don't know how it is in the UK, but I know here, like growing up, it's very much like, no, you need to get specifically a legal or medical job, or else there's going to be problems and you'll starve to death and da 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 da. It's like, you can make money doing all kinds of things. Like,
never overlook how lucky I have. I never overlook how lucky I have been. These things are far from certain. But it's possible to basically. I live in a house I pay for. And I do this for making up stuff for money. But it's easier in Britain in some ways because we do have a safety net in the way that we don't have to worry about insurance. We don't as much anyway.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things that like has me slightly terrified. My day job is like walking dogs because I decided I want to do the minimal amount of work to keep myself going while I'm doing things like trying to write and these interviews and podcasts and shit. So constantly I'm like, oh man, hope I don't get sick.
When I was getting to comic, fucking hell, man, that's awful. I remember when I was getting into comics, as in Phonogram, my first book had come out.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that here in a little bit. You've got quite a bit of, you do a lot of interesting work with Image and then Marvel especially. You've got tons of Marvel stuff.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like when I was trying to break in, it was like I did actually have that whole thing. It's okay, I'm working as a journalist. How much what's the absolute minimum of journalism I could do a month to pay for my able to eat and live in a house, and then be able to spend how much time on comics? Because I cannot be guaranteed any money from work for hire comics. Sorry, the creator-owned comics I'm doing, as in Phonogram. I never got any real money until like 2010 for Phonogram. I mean, got $500 issue 3 of the first Phonogram. But everything else just basically went into paying Jamie.
Wow.
Yeah, so in other words, like doing the math on, okay, if I want to do this, what's the minimum amount of money I need? And literally I came home and opened, and there was a check from Image for like 17 cents had just arrived.
Which why even waste the money on like mailing it? It made the check probably costs more than that.
Yeah, exactly. As in, like, posting it is going to cost it. But I had that when I got a $17 check. It was that kind of, oh right, okay. I really need to underline the fact I can't cancel any money from this place. Still.
Oh, that's awesome. Then I guess another one really quick. Why comics specifically? Like, what about comics was it that was like, oh yeah, I'll write this way?
I came to comics late. As I read them as a kid, and then fell out as a teenager because I wasn't really a comic shop in Stafford. And I got back into my 20s. Specifically, I discovered Alan Moore when I was 21, and then was kind of like 1 or 2 trades a year kind of person, like really very, very casual. When I was 25, I discovered the work of Warren Ellis, and I went in hard. And the way I always describe it is like, it's like imagine like not really having heard pop music until you were 25. Like you knew it existed. You know what I mean? You never knew it. You knew it existed, but then you hit this. And what's it? The shop's full of this stuff. It's got like this 100 years history of this medium, and I can discover this as a 25-year-old. So part of it was the newness. I came to comics as a late convert, and like devoured it as somebody, somebody who always liked new stuff. There was like, here's a form of novelty. But the other side is very specifically there's a certain. I like how comics are disreputable. I'm somebody who's naturally drawn to fighting underdog corners, which isn't necessarily a good thing, but it's certainly part of me. You know what I mean? As a critic, I wrote about pop music, I wrote about video games, and I wrote about comics. These are free. It's not like I wrote about books, movie, and TV because they're the winners. Why would I care? Why would I be bothered fighting on the winner's side? So it's partially that, and partially it's just the fact that as a relatively underexposed medium, you can try to push stuff. This is the thing I said. Somebody who likes the new, like if I could write a really good novel, and it's not going to be. I mean, the modernists did it all. With comics and games, and so that's actually not with at least comics and games, you've got space to genuinely push stuff still. As in the canon isn't complete, and not that I want to particularly care about the canon, but the idea of it's still everything to play for. I also like collaborate. As a writer, I also like collaboration. Like
comics that do that.
It's true. It's like being a comic. It's also get a bit of this being the game design as well. But with comics, I write a script, and I write detailed scripts. There's a level of control, and I'm interested in writing for the form. But at the same time, I get to do that and be part of something. But I also get to be the audience of my own work. Because if you're a novelist, it's just the page, and it's you. There's no magic there. It's just you. And if I give something to Jay,
there's a certain amount of magic in it just being you. But yeah, I get what you're saying.
Oh, you know what I mean? I think, okay, there's the magic of your process, but once it's there, it's just there.
Yeah. No, I get it.
Once when you send a script to Jamie or Stephanie, and I get it back, it's like, oh yeah, this is me, but it's also not me. And that kind of
it's like you, the way you envision it in your head is one thing, and then somebody sends you back the art and everything. You're like, oh shit, okay.
Exactly, and there's a real sort of magic and power there. And that's addictive. You talk to comic book writers and getting art every day in your inbox. It's really fun.
That was something Jeremy Whitley brought up when I was talking to him. Especially, I think the one that he mentioned specifically was in the more recent run of Unstoppable Wasp. He had sent to Gurihiro, the artist at the time, and was just like, "Yeah, no, put New York in the background. I don't care how you do it." And then he got it back. He was like, "This is better than anything I could have imagined."
It is. I say, as Jeremy says, it's really addictive and exciting. And when you get something that's genuinely awesome arrives, it takes the top of your head off.
Yeah.
There was something else there I was going to say about collaboration. Oh yeah, just game design. Seeing people run die, and like what they take this sort of structure I've created in a very solitary way, and what people do with it. That's really addictive too in a different way. So that kind of that kind of actually tickles a similar urge. As if somebody told me how fun it is to see people run and take a structure you've begat and make it their own. They mentioned that, this is definitely the cultural conversation has always been exciting to me. Like, I've always liked criticism, but I think people doing those kind of collaborative relationships, whether with your audience or with your collaborators, are really meaningful for me. I find them what's the word?
It always takes me a second when somebody mentions game design, because when I first got out of high school and when I was a kid and everything, I pushed really hard into video game design for a little while, and I've more recently gotten into the discussion for tabletop and things like that and board games, and it takes me a second to transition sometimes. You've been saying game design, and I've been like, yeah, no, that makes sense. And then you mentioned other people building games out of your systems and stuff. I was like, right, that's what we're talking about. Hold on.
No, it's like I was on Friday night. I went to the 20-year anniversary drinks at Eurogamer, which is a British site, and I was one of their first freelancers. Actually, they've launched several years, but when they actually got money to afford to pay for people, I was one of the people who started freelancing for them. because I was used to be a PC gamer and I'd just left to go freelance. So it's such weird. I was like a quote unquote serious games critic for like 15 years, and then I don't play video games anymore. Right, I many of my friends are in the form, but either writing about it or doing it. But like, I just sort of dropped out, and it's quite fun to be this weird old man who doesn't understand anything. It's genuinely fun. And the thing is, it's just not that I've lost interest in games. It's just that I've completely, I'm going to go down this alleyway now because games is big enough. That's always one of my things. I used to think video games and analog games were different, and I was an idiot. And for me, I very much became a much more holistic approach to the idea of games. There's a lot of video game influences in DICE design. Like the dual health system. That's a clear video game influence. As in, you've got, that's basically the health system invented by Halo. Or did Marathon have it? I forget. But one health system replenishes really quickly and the other one doesn't. And that means that you're always closer to death, but also never just on the edge constantly.
That's actually been a really popular system that's kind of come about lately, just across the board. I'm really glad about that because short rest systems are much needed in these games.
Yeah.
I was going to mention your absurd catalog of writing, but we've kind of already touched on that. One in particular I wanted to bring up, though, because a buddy of mine specifically wanted to let you know that it was amazing, was Uber. I haven't actually read it yet, but he absolutely adored it.
Thank you. Uber's like it's one of the, apart from Die, it's probably the most obviously game influenced comic I'd ever written. The idea, for those who haven't heard, it's basically a comic where at the end of World War II, Nazi Germany invents superhumans, and the whole thing forms an arms race from then on. So in other words, it basically gives World War II a third act, is probably the way. And its structure is ridiculously over researched. So it's a sort of it's a story, especially early on before the timelines divulge. It's that kind of, I cared about what the weather was like during this certain battle. That kind of that level of dumbness. But the kind of the game design part is the fact these superheroes is the wrong word, but these powered humans are sort of designed almost in a war game system. So it's like they all interact in mechanical rules. So in other words, in the same way, like if an assault helicopter attacks a tank, the tank's just dead. It works on, so it's never like in the classic superhero comic, Spider-Man would find a way to defeat Galactus. That's the genre, that's what it's for. And in Uber, it's not. Uber's is just tries to give the impression of having these cold, hard mechanical rules beneath it. And it's always like so it's like a war comic with like human technology, might be a way of putting it. And it's been on hold forever. Uber's like my bane of my life. Uber's the bane of my life in that there's 4 issues left to go. And I just can't. Uber's owned by the publisher, and the publisher's basically put it on hold for a while due to reasons too common. So in other words, everyone asked me when you're going to write the last 4 issues of Uber, and it's like it's literally not in my control. So hopefully it's so close. It's so close to the end. I really hope I get around to finishing it, because it'll be a real shame.
That's got to be hellish for fans. Yeah. They're like, no, exactly, it's right there. We just got to get to the finish line.
I've got every sympathy for them in this way. It's kind of especially it's like the whole thing's 51 issues, so like 47 issues are written. It's really near the end.
Oh man, I feel a little bit bad that I don't know more about your catalog and your creator own stuff besides Die, just because like with Whitley, I was like, okay, well, I'll do some research beforehand and look into his work, and he has like a handful of things he's done besides creator own stuff, but he has like 2 or 3 creator-owned comics he's done, and I could easily go through and like catch up with all of those. But with yours, it was like I brought up your works on Wikipedia, and I was like, "There's no way I'm gonna be able to do any amount of research that's gonna keep me up on these." But I did notice you finished Wicked and the Divine lately, didn't you?
Yes, I did. As I was saying, the thing is, I'm prolific. That's the thing, is I do a lot, and like the graphomania of me in terms of like I like writing lots. Funny, I'm researching H.G. Wells at the moment, and sort of like reading him as a kind of the graphomanic tendencies are real, and this kind of I recognise this urge. Sorry, I missed the question.
There wasn't really a question there. It was just me babbling for a couple of seconds. But I guess this is as good a transition as any. You mentioned in other interviews that I've been able to dig up kind of what brought on Die, but if you could kind of cover that again really quick, just for anybody who's listening who doesn't want to do a shitload of research?
Sure. I mean, the idea of goth. I mean, the two-word picture of like die is goth Jumanji, which is the sort of thing I say as you say as a joke, but it's also quite true. Basically, like a few years ago in 2016, me and my mates Jamie McKelvey and Ray Fawkes, we were like hanging around at San Diego getting ice cream and shopping for shoes. And we started joking about the 1980s D&D cartoon, which is basically a group of kids went on a D&D theme park ride and gets dragged into a fantasy world and trapped there, and the whole thing is can they get home? And the joke was, whatever happened to those kids? And Jamie, I think I knew it as well, as in the final episode was actually written, and and it was just never filmed. And the idea sort of stuck at me, the idea of these kids as four things.
They're just stuck there forever now.
And then that's exactly got me stuck as thinking. And then like in the evening, I kind of realised why that stuck to me. And the idea that you could write the story about taking these people who went through a fantasy world and were trapped there as 16-year-olds and getting them coming back as 40-something-year-olds. And the idea, use that as a device to study these characters, 6 character studies, about these people. What were they like then? What were they like now? How has the trauma of that experience affected their life? How has the trauma of life affected them? What were their teenage dreams like? What were their adult realities like? And what would they do to change things? As an immediate, it's like, oh no, this is a clean, dramatic construct. And then I just started building from there. Like Sol was the original, who is the evil dungeon master character. Peter Pan as serial killer is my kind of easier way of describing it.
That makes sense, yeah.
And so that's kind of like, okay, that the idea was what part, I'm somebody who did part of me fall into a fantasy realm at the age of 16, as in how has my love of fantasy and all this stuff stunted me as a human being? And that I quite like asking myself hard questions in the work. So that was the initial character. And then the other ones kind of came from that, as in how else can life change? What other things can you regret? What can you miss? And having these 6 characters allow me to dig in deep on them. And then the rest came from there. I originally thought it was going to be quite elegant, as in just these character studies. And then it was like immediately being me, there's an entire history of the RPG, as in it becomes this meta world about the this world represents how the RPG came to be, and the big conspiracy background, and all the other nonsense, and this 65,000 word RPG system hanging off the side. So like I have basically one setting which is too much.
Yeah, from the looks of it, you have one setting that's actually 20, and you were just like, all right, cool.
It's not like maximalist. I'm a maximalist kind of person. I was
go big or go home.
Yeah.
Cool. So that's the comic, but what about the RPG? What moment were you just like, fuck it, why not? Let's let people play with this.
It's tricky because it's kind of like I can't remember the exact moment I thought I want to do an RPG at this. I think I remember the inspiration, but I don't remember the precise moment. And I definitely don't remember the precise moment it became as big as it is. My friend Lee Alexander, who actually I was just crashing at a house last on Friday night, we did an issue of Wicked Divine where it was kind of born off the guy Kevin Wadder, who is an amazing artist, but he doesn't do sequentials. He only does like covers. And I'm like, well, how on earth can we do an issue with Kevin Wadder? And then, you know what I mean? Like, he just, like, how can we, because like, he's a mate. He loves Wicked Div. We love him. How can we do an issue without sequentials? Then I had the idea, let's do the whole issue like a magazine, like a fashion magazine, because it's Wicked Divine's about gods and pop stars. So we do the structure, basically it's a magazine structure and just these interviews with each god. So Kevin just goes to town, does fashion shoot, because he does this kind of really fashion vibe. High fashion god shoots, and I will write all these imaginary interviews and we could sort of talk about the gods in that way. Then I had the idea of, no, let's not do that. Since I used to be a journalist, me and Jamie are moving those circles. We know a lot of credible journalists. Let's like get 5 of our journalist friends to write those interviews, and for the actual interview text, I'll get on an instant message chat because I used to play like mushes in the 90s, like the text-based RPG stuff.
Yeah.
So I'll get on a text chat and role play the gods live with the journalist, and then they'll take that transcript and write it up like they would a real world story. And then it's like, okay, let's do that. And we did do that. We found these 5 amazing journalist friends of ours, and then we also did like, it's laid out as a magazine. I write the editorial in my voice. It's a big kind of like weird piece of work. And what Lee said about that is, I find your work most interesting when you're doing the things which only your skill set allows you to do. as in the stuff which very, very few other people could actually do. And I was dismissive about that. You know what I mean? Like, because no one likes to take a compliment. But the kind of
that, and it's also one of those compliments that like it's so specific and kind of like high concept. Like, this is a thing that your voice is perfectly suited for that nobody else can do. You're like, there's like 6 billion people in the world. Somebody can probably do it just as well or better than me.
Yeah.
But like,
I mean, of course, there's always a question of access and all that. But specifically in terms of like, probably won't exist without you. And in the case of that, it's like, you're right, because it's like that could not work if I was not spent 15 years as a journalist. That could not work if I hadn't spent time on internet like chat back in the 90s. So I was capable of role playing characters live. That would not work. All these kind of different things I had to draw together, as being able to art edit, these different skills which I learned from a variety of different jobs I've done in the creative fields, which is not a common selection, and also the desire to do it even. And so basically, that was one of the things I'm trying to do going forward, like in terms of and so that was in my head when you think about dying, and that kind of, no one else no one else would do a comic series. I mean, people have done RPG systems, their comics before, but no one would really do it. And so like, Die takes things really seriously, like that as a comic. It's thing about, it approaches like the RPG, and not as a kind of fun and games thing, no pun intended, but as a kind of, let's really deconstruct this form. And the idea of actually taking that and then trying to work a way to mechanize the world and its stories and all those kind of elements, that's based upon, I've got a few games designs lying around. When I'm bored, I might knock up Game Maker and make something. So like, I've been a Sunday painter, but I've also seriously looked at games. So both the intellectual part of it is something there's not many games critics with that 15 years of genuine study. At the same time, I've really like listened to game designers, and that kind of, but specifically some of my skill in narrative design. No, it's not narrative design. Narrative design's a job. As somebody who is a writer with my level of experience, trying to make an RPG based upon those kind of, that there's not, that's interesting, unusual, and my graphomanic tendencies would mean I would try to do it properly, because it's like, I'm very I keep on calling myself an amateur, and I get some of my game design friends who are annoyed. Kieron, you've done a game now. You're not allowed to call yourself that. But at the same time, I try to bracket that based on, I don't know what, I'm somebody with a lot of experience in another form. In fact, at least a couple of other forms. But I'm aware this is not my home turf. I want to approach it respectfully. And it's it's the reason why the first arc's called Fantasy Heartbreaker. In that, that's it's a nod to a bit of quite obscure RPG design terminology. So that's my kind of mea culpa in terms of like, that's kind of what it is. But I swear to God, I've done my homework. So that's kind of where it came from. In that, let's try to do this. And of course, doing an RPG, and the other part of it, I just thought it'd be fun.
It's an interesting system, I'll give it that. What are some, I guess, kind of, I've got a couple of questions lined up here, but I think we already answered which one came first, the RPG or the comic. Sounds like the comic.
Oh yeah, definitely the comic. In terms of like, the game was always explicit. I mean, that the game as is released was explicitly designed to recapitulate the first arc of the comic. In other words, your own version, not like the events or anything, but this is
but like a player's own version of it.
Yeah. Take a group of fucked up people, put them into this situation, and due to the way the structure work, you'll get to a climax. That's kind of my idea.
It's definitely an interesting system. I'm very excited to get into some of the specific nuances of it. But before we get there, what have been like some challenges that you faced making the system while making the story it's based off of?
It's kind of like, structurally speaking, I had I knew the basic structure of the story. Like, and that, like, not even basic, it's that kind of, narratively speaking, we get to this denouement where the characters decide to go home or not. So that kind of like, that was there. I think the problem was much more the fact that I was doing them at different times, and I moved back and forward. And there's definitely a time I was worried about, wait, are you just really writing an RPG here and the comic is this appendix, or is it vice versa? Which is the tail, which is the dog? And the metaphor I normally use, at one point, the dog ate its own tail, and the whole thing became an Ouroboros. the way I kind of think about Die now is kind of like the way I imagine Tolkien thought about his languages. The idea that the RPG in the comic have sort of become expressions of a higher die thing,
Yeah,
as in die exists as an entity outside of either one of those expressions, and both are kind of
it's kind of become its own little like mini franchise, and you're just like,
yeah, it's like franchises. I prefer like gods or extra planar beings. The idea that we can't, if we saw a 4-dimensional form, we wouldn't see it, right? Because it exists in a different dimension. The idea of die being this thing that exists outside of these things, and these two devices allow you to look at it at different angles.
Yeah.
Which for me, like, that adds to the quote unquote reality of it. So that's where it's ended up now. But the interesting process of actually how the football passed back and forth between the two, as in, like, I had this structure, then I worked on the game, and I hit a problem in the game, then I sort of solved it, and then I realized, oh no, that goes back in the comic now. And it's like, whilst a literary device, as in a comic, is very different from a ludic device, as in a game.
Yeah.
But so they're always not going to be one for one. But how they push back and forth and fed each other. I mean, the big thing is the reveal about the Fallen. I mean, the Fallen, they exist in the comic. Before I didn't realize what the Fallen were in the comic until I realized in the game. It's that moment to realize, okay, I kind of want people to be able to murder. So once they get killed, I don't play in the game. Kicking people out of the players. Sorry, people being kicked out of the game is rubbish.
Yeah.
Oh, let's remove their vote. And then there's still okay, what happens then? Oh, if they kill them, they get the vote back. These are rules, but they're dramatic rules. You know what I mean? As in, this allows you to, like, you're in a system and the rules are playing out, and it's okay, what do you do? One of the weird influences in terms of the die, especially in the RPG, in some degree the comic, is these are reality TV show rules.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, we created a set game. What do these people do? And it's always here's the situation. What now? And then by the way the players and all the characters interact, you get your story. So that's probably the most interesting thing. And I said the place we were in now, especially when I worked out, as I said in the rules, every single die game is canon. Like, they all happen in, like, die is this sort of fractal realm, and there's a place in die where every story you've ever ran in die exists. So the idea, die is a place where everyone's, it's an extra place.
Yeah, it's like this giant collaborative story that you're writing with anybody who wants to jump in.
Yeah.
That's really awesome.
Yeah. So it's definitely like it consumes. So, like, the word consume is because consume always makes me think of parasites. So you know what I mean? Like, I would be careful of, like, explicitly built into die is a question mark over its existence. Which is fun.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff I want to branch off of from there, but to keep myself a little bit more focused, I think it's fairly obvious what some of the narrative inspirations for Die, both the comic and the RPG are, especially the RPG, because basically every single line is a Tolkien reference.
That was funny because Tolkien is much more like Tolkien's crept up on me, because a lot about writing Die has been about. I mean, I wrote about it in the back of issue 3, but like kind of coming to peace with Tolkien, which has been nice. You know what I mean? Like, Tolkien is like, was somebody who I had a degree of anger towards for a while, but it's also fundamentally influential on me. And in the RPG, it's like, I think it's less of an influence in the RPG. It's just quite funny to just keep on talking about Tolkien. As I said earlier, I think about the RPG in the way that Tolkien, I think, felt about the languages. As in, the languages kind of existed. Middle Earth exists, so his languages were better.
Yeah.
A language and his work into languages basically speak to the reality of Middle Earth, and these two things feed into each other. A lot about, like, this thing about actually the process of writing the Die manual is explicitly me. I'm gonna have fun. Like, this is my love song to the Paranoia RPG 2nd edition, or various other, like, slightly egotistical playful game manuals. And in the case of just if you hit Tolkien's a pretty safe reference. And if I'm trying to explain stuff, you can get, like, an energy there.
If you're talking about an RPG and you mention Tolkien, people are going to get what you're talking about, just because of the nature of RPGs kind of being built out of his worlds most of the time.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, that's, like, without a doubt there. But there's the thing about Die the World, as I've sort of said, is like there's 20 sides to it, and every side is based around an aspect of something that I think was a major influence on D&D. We've seen it in the comic with issue 3.
Yeah,
and it's not a one for one riff. As in, it's not like you go to Tolkien world. It's kind of okay. Let's talk about Tolkien.
It's not a theme park. It's like an examination.
Yeah.
So you mentioned just now Paranoia Second Edition, but like, what mechanical inspirations kind of go into Die as an RPG? Because, like I said, you did mention Paranoia Second Edition, and we've talked a little bit like off and on about D&D, but like this is a pretty fundamentally odd system by comparison to D&D. You do a lot of things that are new, as far as I can tell.
It's like, so I think I'm quite tricky to unpack what is new and what is just me taking from various sources. I mean, I put a reading list in the back of the beta, and I should put some more stuff. I don't think I mentioned a game called The Mountain Witch. I looked at games which were kind of in a similar place to Die, as in I knew what the Die story was, and a lot of the research of like Die was, as well as like just sitting down and reading a load of books. I put together a role-playing group with a few friends who wanted to explore the form. So instead of sitting down and doing the classic big campaign, we played short games. Like our campaigns were never longer than four parts. We did a lot of one-offs, and that basically gave us me and actually one of the other players is Quentin Smith, who runs a site called Shut Up and Sit Down. So us exploring, and us basically, okay, we're going to sample the form and see what it's like and learn and what appeals to us and what doesn't. That a lot was research there. I mean, I think the main where I started with Die was, well, partially I knew this. I eventually wanted the core system in terms of like when you're actually in the fantasy world to be weirdly objective, and that's like a simulationist approach. The reason for that was, despite I really play a lot of narrative Powered by the Apocalypse games, but they are about simulating a story, and they imply the players are fundamentally different to everything else they meet in the game. Mostly the players only roll, and that means that nothing else is real. And if you've got a game which is based around the idea that it's about questions of reality, and the game actually answers the question, well, there's no, So as I came back to being an objective system as a goal by trying to through narrative means or narrative reasons rather. So that's like one thing. I knew it would have to be a dice pool system.
Yeah.
The reason I wanted to do a dice pool system was because this game could have abstractly been made in 1990. You know what I mean? To be honest, there's a lot of influences by things that came out later. But really, if you had some incredibly precocious, weirdo 16-year-old in 1991, it could have happened. And if a teenager in 1991 was designing a game and they thought they were pretty cool, there's no way they would roll D20. The new hot thing was definitely, it was dice pools because exactly Vampire came in that year using a D10 system, and a lot of dice pool stuff was floating around. So in other words, I knew that. That led to like other thoughts, as in one of the sort of other floating design goals was the sort of this game. Like I'm a big fan of Dungeon World. I find it's like a poem about D&D. The idea, okay, let's try and make a system that evokes the feelings that D&D was meant to provoke. And I thought, okay, I'm interested because Die is about turning the RPG into a horror story and using the tropes of the satanic panic to play with, because we're allowed to now. I thought, okay, let's try to fetishize like D&D itself. Let's take the icons like the dice and make them magical. That's kind of the story. As in, like, what takes you to a fantasy world? What the dice do. They're those kind of weird 6 objects people put on the table. They look like something. If you just look at them, they look weird. I can absolutely understand why parents are scared of this game. Because what the hell are those objects? Why does that one have 20 sides?
Who decided dice need more sides?
Exactly. Yeah. Why those 14 extra sides must be satanic? So doing this. So that was one of the goals there. A lot with the ritualism of RPGs.
Yeah.
So that led to 2 places. One, which is all players have 1 dice they own. As in only they get to touch that dice. That was a key idea. Is let's work out ways to make those owning a dice feel special, and also make all the character classes be very different in terms of, partially because that makes each person feel fundamentally different, but also trying to increase the mystery of all other players. As in, I don't quite know how the cleric works. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that kind of idea. And that makes trying to create some magic there. That was at least part of it. And the other side of the ritualism is explicitly, we use a lot of old D&D maps and like reimagining what we can do with these stuff. But the other thing is like the actual magic circle of an RPG. Like the game structure is, you have an outer level, which is a pure story game where you sit and you talk about a story and you make a story. You make a group of people are messed up. I did it to some degree. And that's like purely collaborative and it's purely question driven and there are no rules. Then you step into it, then you do a section which is highly influenced by the like Nordic LARP, like these kind of like games where you're in character all the time and you're acting out a situation. And this is a Nordic LARP, a sort of miniature Nordic LARP where you are playing an RPG. So you then go from a story game to this LARP where you actually then play out an RPG. You generate.
You've kind of generated this this game where like you've taken the magic circle idea and put a magic circle in the magic circle on top of it.
Yeah.
It's odd.
That's it. I mean, like there's sort of the weird energy of that, and then the magic circle of an RPG, and we turn that into a literal magic circle. And at one point during the LARP, then they get sucked into a fantasy world, and then we go into something that's much. I said it's a classical objective RPG system, as in all entities in the world are simulated equally. But there's rules to the thing. As in, the rules about getting home are quite strict. And then you play through and see what happens. And then at the same time, even when you're in this fantasy world, you skip back to the outer levels. Like you regularly the GM might a lot of like Power by the Apocalypse stuff, which I love. They do stuff like, okay, tell me about the okay, how do you know this town is a danger of attack? And you get to and the players explicitly change the world they are in.
Yeah, collaborative storytelling kind of situations.
Yeah, in Die you don't get to do that. Like your world is very much out of your control. However, the real world is entirely inside the player's control. So the GM might ask, tell me about tell me about your mother. Tell me about the last time. Tell me what makes you angry about your mother. Or tell me a time you have fought with your mother, and then you can make it whatever you want, and then the GM might integrate that with the game world.
Yeah, the DM gets to play around with the idea a little bit.
Yeah, I mean it's like it's always like that. So at some level you've got all the kind of creative control of a traditional narrative RPG, but how it integrates is out of your control, and that's what interested me about Die in terms of the idea that the dialogue between these two different forms of RPG, and the sort of the magic of what's collaboration is really interesting. What's also really interesting is something out of your control. This kind of part and that's the Power by the Apocalypse games really lean into this in terms of in fact that whole school in that it's a conversation. Then you turn to the dice, and the dice take the game out of your control, and then it becomes feral. Is the general phrase, and then whatever the dice negotiate, then you pick up the conversation again. And Die does that on a couple of levels. Despite the fact that it's a very hard simulationist world, it's always integrated with another narrative world. So this kind of, in some ways, it's a game about these conversations between what is an RPG and also what do people come to RPGs for and what is fantasy for. Because you say, fundamentally, the characters' story, these are messed up people. They go to a fantasy world and they face their issues. As in, do they want to go into fantasy, or are they going to willing to take these lessons and grow for them? That's the story. And the fifth and weird thing, but despite all this nonsense, I talk about this and I sound like literally I'm like that person whose bedroom walls covered in notes and I'm about to start screaming. But in the weirdness, when you actually play it, it's actually it's weirdly accessible. Like people, and you get role play from. I've got pretty serious role play from groups who don't really have experience of role play. In terms of like, if you play a dwarf, people tend to like either they don't play a dwarf, or they they play this kind of like very basic idea of a dwarf. If you sit down and talk about a social group, so I know what my angry friend from high school might be like, or I know what you create these very normal human people and you can role play them quite easily because you know those people.
Yeah.
And then you put them in a weird situation. So you actually get, by grounding it in the real world, you actually make role playing in the fantasy world easier too. Because this is kind of like, I'm playing like my slightly fussy, serious grandmother who's suddenly been transformed into the body of a hulking warrior. So how immediately there's it's really accessible in that very weird way. So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted.
Yeah, that added level of character creation where you have to actually like sit down and hammer out who everybody is. That's honestly kind of inspired, and I've started personally I've just started using that in like other games just in general, because it does a lot of the heavy lifting of getting people to understand like the role playing aspect of it. Because like you mentioned earlier, like if you sit down with somebody, especially in like D&D or something like that, and they make a dwarf. They're gonna either play that as like a cartoonish caricature of Peter Jackson's version of Tolkien's dwarves, or they're gonna play just a blank character that has stats. So this added level of like getting into these characters' history is amazingly powerful.
There's a lot of like there's a lot of the narrative RPGs like ones who move in more traditional space. They do have that really quite aggressive questions, as in like why you like, okay, why did you go into this dungeon? And the player will say whatever they want. And then, I mean, and even if you say like, oh, I'm going to get rich, and it's like, well, why do you want to get rich? And let's go, what do you want to spend the money on? Why do you want to spend them? And you carry on eventually asking questions. People think about, oh, I know what that person is now.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the I suppose Fiasco's on the list of influences to die, but I mean, I did actually play with, instead of just asking questions, something a bit more formal in terms of like charts and stuff. And I ended up deciding that actually was too limiting. You'll see, in issue 7 of Die, we've got a more cut down set of questions approach, which also that's useful in a different way and probably useful for anyone trying to write a scenario. But I did this thing when I was quite early in my RPG relapse. It was I was running a game for a group of friends, none of whom had ever played an RPG before. This is kind of my thing. My friends always say, Kieron, we've never played, let me run a game for us. Like my wife's a poet, and running a game for a group of serious academic poets is a very different experience.
Oh man, that's got to be intense.
Yeah, it's fun because I mean, especially like someone don't know any of the RPG references, but and they just bring in what they know. So like we end up playing a lot of Babylonian myth, and that which is fun, But what I did for this game called Dragon Warriors, which is a 1980s sort of D&D, not clone, but it was like a British answer to D&D and entirely unknown outside Britain and I think Australia. And I was running the first adventure I ran, and it's just got a pretty standard dungeon crawl. But I wanted to have something a bit more modern RPG in there. So I started by just playing the first half of a Fiasco game. Like you have these cards, like in Fiasco, you work up your identity and who you are and your relationship with another player. And the other two, which are like drives and stuff like that, more complicated.
Yeah.
So it was by using using these Fiasco prompts to create relationships between players, we created a group. So in other words, it's like I made everyone have Sai's character, Sai Spurrier, who's an amazing comic writer. I said, okay, this guy's a sorcerer. And he's this rich noble. Everyone got their own relationship. So the thing about Dragon Warriors is almost everyone plays a knight. Like in a party of 6, 4 people were knights or something like that. Like that's the kind of part of the basic of the idea of the game. So that and they all very similar stats and all very similar abilities. But then one of them was end up being this poet who's secretly in love with Sai's character. One of the characters was his mum, disguised trying to protect him. And you got this from this was just by playing a few cards in these, and rolling up a few dice in these tables, and people immediately knew who they were. As in, I'm weirdly protective mum who's coming in armor and can't admit she's actually come along for the journey. That's a fun character. And immediately, like it was a dungeon crawl, it still played as a dungeon crawl, but immediately you had that kind of more, everyone had cool prompts. And this is the thing is, I think people occasionally trip in this in RPGs, is that limitations are almost always a good thing. In terms of like thinking I can be any dwarf is impossible. Like that's like I'm a dwarf who is really who is I don't know lost his toy soldier collection and is now traumatized. Any like
that feels like something that not just like RPG players in general can benefit from, but like creators as a whole seem to forget sometimes that like. Yeah, if you've got like a pile full of Legos, you might make the world's most square house. But if you've got a pile full of Legos that are like Star Wars branded, like you know what you're gonna build, but it's something that's gonna be like much more interesting than just like here are some blocks.
Yeah, I mean limitations are always a great aid to creativity. I mean, this is all the way part of in Die's creative process in terms of the comic. I've created a system of rules beneath it, which makes things harder for myself. But it's specifically forcing myself into weird decisions. Like in part of the game, there's this thing, the game and the comic, Plutchik's Wheel of Emotions, which is like real, like period psycho research stuff. And the idea being, of course, there's 8 emotions, and there's only 8 emotions. All other feelings are either about those emotions varying in intensity or those emotions mixing. So that's like I use that as the basis for the whole emotion like system. However, I've also used the gods. So I've got 12 gods of die in the comic, and I know they have to work like a pantheon, so the gods have to be able to do stuff. But if you've got, say, the mother god, the healing goddess, or the war god, or whatever, these end up as archetypes, and archetypes are kind of just cliches with PhDs. So they have to be. I wanted the archetype. I also wanted them to be slightly their own thing. So I could actually sit there in a blank paper and try to really pick apart, which is kind of what I did with the character classes. The character classes are deconstructions of the D&D classes. But I thought this game isn't really about the gods, or this comic isn't really about the gods. These are kind of like color. So I thought, let's try. Can I get them from another system? So I thought, okay, the emotions. So I looked at the emotions, and there are 24 dyads. Dyads are when you base an emotion formed by mixing two emotions, like awe or awesomeness, or various forms of guilt, or shame is one of the shame, or like all these different ones. 24, of course, I've got 12 gods because I need 12 gods as the dice. That is twice as many as I need. So I thought, can I have 24? I thought, no, that's rubbish. Then I realised what I said. There are actually 12 opposing pairs. So whereas these two dyads are the opposite. I'm actually I'm googling here. So I use these 12 contrasting emotions as prompts. So where are we? Okay, like awe and aggressiveness, despair and pride, submission and contempt, guilt and envy, hope and unbelief, optimism and disapproval, anxiety and outrage. These kind of like, okay, and I'll make a god inspired by those two words. And the thing is, since they're mostly contradictory, it's like, okay, what the hell is that god like? And so, for example, delight and pessimism. So and that led to a character called Mistress Woe. Mistress Woe is basically the god of bad luck. And so delight, I say, how about a fatal luck god who really likes it when things go wrong? Delight and pessimism. Pessimism, they always know it's going to go wrong. Delight, but I kind of like it.
Yeah, that was now that you kind of brought that up. That has made the gods that you bring up feel very much like classical Greco-Roman gods, where like
yeah, definitely
full characters on their own, but they're also kind of assholes.
Yes, 100%. A tramping of 12. It's the Greco-Romans there, and the idea of making them characters rather than just archetypes was so like. So when a god turns up, you're excited to see what they like. I mean, like,
yeah. There's a very obvious contrast between like
the Skywatcher is anxiety and outrage. The idea that's got me thinking about. Oh yeah, he's just always worried, and he's always about to explode. I got the idea of somebody reading that person who reads the paper and gets very angry and throws it down, and then carries on reading the paper and I imagine the Skywatcher keeps on refreshing Twitter, and so the idea of this sort of very this agriculture god, and the idea that like who's more worried than a farmer? A farmer in agricultural times, knowing that if it rains too hard or rains too little, they are just screwed. So they're just constantly sitting there. So I thought that'd be an interesting way to look at that sort of character. So I'm trying to scroll. Awe and aggressiveness is the bear, which is quite a simple one. Awe and aggressiveness is quite an easy one to square, though. Love and remorse. That may lend me to the mourner, who is our healing god, and so the healing goddess. And her thing was always okay, love and remorse. The idea, she's always going to lose that. And I thought, let's lead into a healing goddess who knows that, oh no, everyone's going to die. And now we've got the image of her as a mother. It's this mother with only dead children, as in all her children are dead, and that's what essentially because the gods of life knows that all her children are dead.
Yeah,
because that's what being live means. So the idea of that led this really very gothic healing goddess.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. I want
kind of an
these are all more interesting because I've created weird limits and then try to So yeah, speaking to your thing, I think that's same. It's true in writing, and it's also true in like games as well. I mean, one of my favourite rules in like 13th Age. A game which is fundamentally very D&D, but the one special thing rule. Do you know this? It's like I say, it's a very standard D&D sort of setup. I'm underestimating there. It's interesting in lots of ways, but it's just not a weirdo narrative game. But every character has one special thing about them. The player gets to decide that. It's not like a special ability like breathing fire, but it's like, and they can basically say whatever they want.
Yeah.
And this is immediately like I'm the only dwarf ever been. I'm the only dwarf who is accepted by friends as an elf, and that immediately says something about them, but also says something about the world. As in this world, elves and dwarves aren't usually friends. And that immediately becomes such a big narrative because it's immediately you put a big flag in. This is what I think is cool about my character. And some people could go, will go as big as I just described. And the other person is, I'm the only dwarf with blue eyes. That's also interesting in a completely different way. And those very small elements then feed back into the campaign because the GM, will look at it and go, oh, that's interesting. What they've made this choice. I need to make this choice interesting for them. As in a lot of.
Yeah, and it colors like little things all the time. Because even like the examples you brought up, like one dwarf having blue eyes is just as interesting, or can be just as narratively interesting as like one dwarf being friends with elves. Because on the one hand, you've got like this giant world implications from that, but just the idea of a dwarf having blue eyes is also kind of a big has a lot of implications kind of involved with it too. They have equal amounts of
exactly. That's
this is odd.
Just giving back to
people.
Die and a lot of the when asking questions, this is kind of like you're always looking for like what is the big regret of the character. But you're always looking for minor details, and it's always for me like so much of the fun of Die is when you go to the fantasy world and yes, if the character is regrets never misses their dead dog or whatever. Yes, that dead dog's going to turn up, but like if they'd mentioned something else in passing, like
of course, obviously,
I can't think of anything, literally any. Maybe Aragorn the Ranger, like Aragorn, like Lord of the Rings in passing, and the dog is Aragorn's pet or something. Like, I mean, like something really minor, as in matching something like ephemeral with something fundamental. That A is part of Die's appeal, but I think it's also weirdly part of interesting fantasy. The mixture between something that really affects us on a personal level and something which is, that sword looks really cool, or as in it's both that it can be both simultaneously is really important, I think.
Yeah, that's a concept I haven't played around with very much when I've run things, but I'm definitely going to have to dig into that. I actually started. Well, I say started about the same time that I tried to set up this interview. I started a game of Die, and for longer than has been setting this interview up, we have delayed the second second session.
I was say that's role playing games, isn't it?
It's
I'll just have to put one of my one a game called Heart, which is really good. It's still in playtest. It's on Kickstarter next year. But it's like, we've got one more session to go, and one of our friends has just got to basically move out the area for a while. So I have no idea when the final session will be.
Yeah. No, our problem has just been the fact that like we've got 7 people that we're trying to like coordinate between, and that's not because we went with a full cast of classes. So like trying to coordinate 7 people across most of the US is
Which one did you double up
online?
Because presumably the master's played by you. Oh, I know.
Sorry. I don't know why I said 7. It's 6.
When people trying to do like more than, I'm like, hey, that's going to break the game. Not going to break the game, but it's going to be really hard. Because it works in it. If you're playing more mechanical games, I think bigger parties can work. But if you're doing games where there's a bit more in terms of like asking the questions about the emotions, that you need more spotlight time for everybody. So I've run a lot of 6-player games, and it's fun, but it's definitely hard work. Not
Yeah, it has its own. I'm excited to see people kind of like play with what classes they bring into stuff. Like, because everything that I've seen so far is just people like, oh, here's like a full set of characters, and admittedly I haven't seen very many of them so far, but I'm interested in seeing people like, what if we have a full party of is it diplomats? It's been a while since I've looked at it. Dictators, that's right. Like, let's have a full party of dictators, or let's have a party of godbinders. Like, God, that'd be fun. I'm I'm having a really, really like excited
I mean, it's
notions
I mean,
here
this is one of the
just
things.
to mess
This is
around
like
with the
putting something
system.
in the world. People get to
But
play with it, and like, especially, I mean, like, there's rules in even the beta and saying,
yeah,
you
yeah,
completely can do that, but of course, you still don't change the text. Sorry, I recommend not changing the text. When you give the dice to someone, you say, "This is the only dice in the world." And if you're saying this is the only dice in the world, and you're giving out multiple of the same dice, instantly that's the story. At least that's an element in the story. It implies that either I'm lying. Okay, what am I lying about? Which one of these dice is real, or is none of these dice real, or what's the lie?
yeah,
And that is also a story. So like, there's a lot of fun stuff there. Even
oh
like
yeah, yeah. I'm one of the ideas I really wanted to play with as soon as I got this first one done is I think it was mentioned somewhere in the optional rules you put in the Highlander rules where like there's only one die and everybody has to fight over it
I
if
think
they're
that,
playing
like,
multiple
that's fun.
classes.
I mean, my
Like that would be
implication was
awesome.
kind of like that, as in, if there's multiple of the same class, only one of them is the real one, and that becomes like part of the game. As in, they probably got to kill each other to, like,
Yeah.
not kill each other, but come into negotiate the problems of the context. Oh, I've probably got time for one more question, by the way. I've just checked the time.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. I was gonna say I was looking at it and I was like, oh, we've already hit like close to an hour. Then just like winding down and pulling away from sort of the meat of all this. If you had to cast actors for a Die movie, anything
I
in
am
particular
this is
that pops out that
famously
you'd be
my
really excited to
weakness.
see?
I'm like, I'm really bad at names and faces. Therefore, actually, I don't often cast people. However,
Oh my god.
no, I'm not even sure about
Yeah.
this. As in, like, part of me always saw, like, when I was writing Ash in the fantasy world, I always imagined her as Eva Green for some reason. Or I can imagine Eva Green doing that level of sternness. But even that, I'm not sure I would cast. There's a lot of like, I think the interesting
Yeah.
thing about like
Yeah.
Die is it's quite adaptable in this kind of like, the fact I've created the characters and then create this game beside it means the Die as a story is quite flexible in my head, in terms of, like, in some ways, like, all the games I run are as real as the characters
Yeah.
who I put in the comic. And like, if I let's say I finished Die and did a sequel to Die, and I could run exactly the same story, but just plugging 6 different people in who get dragged in and write that. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Well, because the story is so character focused that even if you wrote the same story and then just put new characters in, like fundamentally that would alter the story because of how much the story is interwoven with how these characters interact.
exactly, yeah. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, that's just the fun of it. Like, what I like about Die. I mean, Wictive was designed to be this big clockwork perfect mechanism, and it's not perfect, but it's strongly structured, no room for a sequel. And Die is shorter. It's going to be about half the length of Wictive, but it's also deliberately bigger. Like, there is stuff in Die you'll never see, and you'll allude to, and it's in the RPG, but even the RPG is bigger than the RPG to contain. And the idea that there is more in the world than we can ever possibly experience tries to, the idea that the world continues off camera, and that's kind of the vibe in Die, as in it's just there's a lot, and that has for me a weight. At least that's the weight we're trying to go towards anyway.
That's really awesome. Well, I won't keep you then if you're running out of time. Once again, thanks a lot for doing the interview. Is there anything just like you want to plug really quick, or I mean, you've got a much bigger platform than I do, but
I mean, honestly, like, it's been lovely talking for a start. I like Die issue 7's out. We're moving away. Issue 8 will be going to the press like this Friday, actually. So like, the first trade's out. It's only available for $10 if people want to listen to this and sound interested. The RPG is available free online at the moment and in beta form, as in diecomic.com/RPG. And there's, as you've noted, there are many, many other books I've written.
yeah. All right. Then yeah. Once again, thanks a lot, and yeah, I don't have a way to close these, so
Bye.
yeah. Later, man.
Okay, catch you. Bye.